So my name's John Richardson. The Head of Innovation at SGN, and I'm currently the Chair of the Scottish branch of the Pipeline Industry Guild. So firstly, big thank you all for registering and attending today's webinar. It's a first for the Scottish branch, I believe. We've had a lot of interest. We've had over 100 registrations, and I can see at the moment we've got over 70 people online. So just a couple of wee guidance points to start us off. So if everyone could mute their mics, and if you could turn your cameras off. I think the only cameras that will come on is from the presenters. We've got options through Zoom for some comments, so please feel free to post any questions or even any clarifications in the chat thread, or there'll be an opportunity at the end of the presentations to ask any questions. The meeting will be recorded today, and we'll also make available PDFs of the presentation material. So agenda today is, we've obviously Scottish branch will give a brief overview of where we're at and what we're trying to achieve. We've got a presentation from Nigel Holmes, who's the CEO of the Scottish Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association. That's in relation to hydrogen pipelines for a net zero economy. That will be an overview, so that will talk us through the achievements so far and the ambitions that we've got in Scotland for hydrogen. We've then got a more, I would say there's some project examples from Alistair Scott, who's a project manager at SGN. The theme around those will be the role of industrial clusters in decarbonising the UK economy. And then there'll be an opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, for some Q&A at the end. So mentioned it at the start, so we're currently rejuvenating the Pipeline Industry Guild Scottish branch, so we are back. This is the first event that we've held of this kind in the Scottish branch, and I believe the first event that we've actually had in a number of years. So we're really pleased with the response in such a short period of time. I think we only shared this information maybe about 7 to 10 days ago, and we've over 100 registrations for the event, and I think there's over 70 people online. So it's, you know, it's some great response and feedback that we've had. Currently, we've got a strong committee in place who are very committed and have been pushing things along over the past year or so to try and get things going again and rejuvenate the branch. We meet monthly, and to be fair, we've had a lot of fantastic support from the other regions and branches to get us up and running again. Again, our main objective for the Scottish branch is to add value to our members in the pipeline industry, and that's both onshore and offshore. And probably the biggest point that I would stress is it's regardless of engineering discipline. We're also kicking off our Scottish Professional Development Network, and we're doing the PDN papers, which will be a competition which allows younger engineers up and coming to actually submit papers for interesting projects that they've been on, and that then goes into a competition across the UK. I'm hoping we'll have many more events like this and competitions, which will allow us to disseminate a lot of the latest ongoings in the pipeline industry in Scotland across our members, and it will also allow us to network with cross-sector, and we'll see how important that is as we dive into the presentations from both Nigel and Ali. And I'll stress it, please get in touch, you know, if you're keen to support, or if you've got a paper that you would like us to present, or ideas for further events of this sort, then please get in touch. We're open to hear from our members. So I'll now stop sharing my own screen, and I'll pass over to Nigel. Thanks.
Good afternoon. So I'm just trying to get my screen shared with you. Bear with me. So good afternoon. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. So I'd like to just take you through a set of slides. There's quite a few slides this afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank you for joining me over your lunchtime. Hopefully you've got a sandwich and a drink in front of you. So over the next 20 minutes or so, what I'd like to do is to just introduce you to the Scottish Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association, and then go through some of the areas where the use of hydrogen and fuel cells will be essential to delivering some of the targets for net zero going forward. Very much in terms of the areas of the energy system which can be more difficult for alternatives. So we'll talk about heavy duty transport, industry, heat as being key areas of opportunity. But then the question is, how do we actually get from where we are now to where we want to be? And this will need the supply of hydrogen, the infrastructure in place that allows us to move it and to store it indeed, and the demand. And this is where the pipelines fit in, and I'd like to hopefully share with you some ideas of how that might start to evolve. So a quick word about the association. We've got about 110 members. I'm delighted that SGN is one of our members and has been very active on the hydrogen front recently. But we've got a host of others, and if you're involved at all in the sector and you're not yet a member, please do get in touch with me, and I'd be delighted to give you some more information. So the starting point is, why are we doing this? And essentially, climate change is the driver. We need to actually take rapid action to address the issues of rising CO2 levels in the atmosphere. And if we don't make things happen fairly quickly, the alternatives are not looking very promising. And within the UK and many other countries, there's been a lot of work on policy and setting targets. So one of the real tipping points recently has been the publication of the Committee on Climate Change Net Zero report last May, which changed the whole emphasis from delivering 80% reduction by 2050 to delivering 100%. And indeed, for Scotland, they actually brought the target forward to 2045. And the key thing is here that CCC advises that you need to do energy efficiency, you need renewables, and you need carbon capture if you're going to stand any chance of reducing your greenhouse gas emissions from where we are now. And we've made great progress since 1990 baseline through to 2045, 2050, where essentially we need to have net zero emissions. So a lot of the progress that's been made already has been with the decarbonisation of electricity. And I use this graph just to illustrate how electricity has done a substantial progress towards decarbonisation of their electricity supply over the past, essentially the past sort of 30, 40 years. But recently, the transition from coal to gas, and then in the past decade or so, the use of more renewable generation. And this chart shows you the trend, but a couple of numbers I just want to share with you. If you use natural gas for producing electricity with CGTC, then it's about 450 grams per kilowatt hour. If you burn gas for heat, it's about 200. But the average for Scottish electricity generation in Scotland at the moment is probably now well under 50 grams per kilowatt hour. So a lot of progress. And this is actually underpinned by some pretty significant changes, closing down all of the coal power stations. So Longannet closed in March 2016. A lot of renewables being installed. You can see from this chart, the growth in onshore wind has been massive over the past 10 years or so. And what we think will happen next is that Scotland will get to its 100% renewables target. But that's just for the electricity sector. So beyond that, it's about installing yet more renewables to actually help to decarbonise other parts of the energy system. So the electricity is just one part of the total. Electricity is about a quarter of the Scottish final energy demand, and if we then start to look at heat, that's over half. So that is one of the biggest challenges, and transport, of course, has to be considered as well. Heat has got its own characteristics. It's colder in the winter, we need more heat. And this chart just shows the variation in the pattern of energy consumption over the years. And you can see the increase over the winter and the decrease in the summer. By comparison, the energy used for transport, which is the blue line, is very steady throughout the year. And for electricity, it's also relatively steady throughout the year, certainly compared to the gas consumption. So what I'd like to do now is take you on a whistle-stop tour around Scotland and some of the locations where we've got projects underway. And starting today, right at the top in Orkney. Now, first thing about Orkney is there's no gas network in Orkney, so they use a lot of electricity for heating, and the treatment in Orkney has been amazing. They're now essentially more than self-sufficient in green electricity. They have been for probably about 5 years, and the challenge is actually now getting the renewable electricity onto the grid, because often the grid doesn't have the capacity to actually move the electricity around. And this is where the use of hydrogen has been central to some of the projects in Orkney. So there are community wind turbines on the islands of Edy in the very north, Shappensea, just north of Kirkwall, which are producing electricity. Often it's curtailed because of the grid issues, and that's now being used in electrolyzers to actually produce hydrogen. That hydrogen can then be moved to where you actually want it, and actually when you actually store it in the cylinders, that gives you some flexibility in that production, supply, and demand. So what does it look like? Well, here's a picture of this was actually the surf and turf opening event about almost 3 years ago now, and just in the middle background you can see the ferry that brings the hydrogen trailer across from Edy or Shappensea. Just on the right you've got the hydrogen trailer, so the cylinders are in the hydrogen trailer, and just to the left in the blue box there's actually a fuel cell which uses the hydrogen to make heat and power, and that's actually used on the dockside for ships that are moored at the dockside, so they don't need to run their engines overnight, so it keeps it nice and quiet. Just down from the dock is actually, I'll point this out as a local feature of interest to many, the Orkney distillery, and they recently did a project on decarbonising distillery with hydrogen, the High Spirits project. At the moment they're just making gin, so we're hoping that that will be starting to go to the full net zero version quite soon. But other projects that are underway in Orkney include decarbonisation of some of the ferries. The one on the right, the Hydyne project, that's running the auxiliary engine, which provides backup power for the systems on the ferry, using a mixture of diesel and hydrogen. The ferry on the left, that is still under construction, but the plan is that will be the first fuel cell ferry in the world of this type, due to be going into operation in the 2020s. And the one I really like, which is a project which is underway at the moment, is the High Flyer project, a 6-seater electric fuel cell plane using hydrogen as the main fuel, undergoing tests firstly at Cranfield, but due to come up to Orkney for some endurance tests in Orkney very shortly. And this is an example of where the hydrogen can decarbonise what people call hard to treat topics. Heavy duty transport, aviation, shipping and trains are just some others. Moving down to Methil, just across from Edinburgh, across the Forth, the Hydrogen Office, which was actually first opened back in 2011. And since then, it's been the home to a number of projects. And the most recent one was the Leavenmouth project, where they actually installed hydrogen refuelling. And they brought in a fleet of hydrogen vehicles. So this is just one of them. This is the first hydrogen refuse collection vehicle operational in the UK, part of that project. And it uses, again, a mixture of hydrogen and diesel to actually drive the engine. So traditional combustion engine, but running much cleaner by using hydrogen. And the hydrogen comes from the wind turbine that you just see in the background. So electricity turned into hydrogen, then used to fuel the refuse truck. And I think Alistair will talk about this in a bit more detail, so I won't talk about it very long, but absolutely critical in terms of the next steps with hydrogen for heat is understanding how this actually might be acceptable by the consumer. And this is exactly what the H100 project is going to do. It's going to give people the choice to actually go between either natural gas or move across to hydrogen for their domestic heating. And just as a background, the Fife Hydrogen Coast, there's a lot of other opportunities around here. There's industry, there's the potential for some underground hydrogen storage using geological features. So this could actually be a great sandpit for testing out some of the ideas around hydrogen production, transportation, and demand. So moving back up slightly to Aberdeen, and most people know Aberdeen as the oil and gas capital, but they are very much looking at the future, and moving from oil and gas to renewables is absolutely on the cards. They've been active in hydrogen fuel cell projects for quite a while. The Aberdeen bus project, which was launched in 2015, brought in the largest fleet of hydrogen buses in Europe, 10 buses. Since that project started, they've run it's over 1 million miles and carried, I think it's about 1.6 million passengers. And there's replacement buses coming in. So these are the single deckers. The next ones you'll see will be double deckers. And as well as the buses, you can see some of the other vehicles, cars, vans, trucks, street sweepers. So a whole fleet of vehicles. I think there's about 55 or 60 vehicles now in Aberdeen running on hydrogen. Also, combined heat and power. This is actually at the new P&J Live exhibition centre, where there's some fuel cell combined heat and power units which provide heat and power to the exhibition centre. These actually run on gas, but they're using essentially the green gas tariff. So you can say essentially these are running green gas for heat and power. And the energy transition zone, so there's also projects, and Alistair may cover these, around scaling up the supply of hydrogen to Aberdeen, linking it to the Acorn project to produce blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is essentially using natural gas with carbon capture to make hydrogen, and with a pipeline coming from St Fergus down to Aberdeen. Acorn, very briefly, one of the key projects in the UK for carbon capture, linked to the St Fergus plant, which is where a lot of the gas comes onshore and is cleaned up before going into the national grid. But using the assets that already exist, some of the pipelines, to take the carbon dioxide from the steam methane reformer and to transport it offshore and actually sequester it in some of the sandstone formations that used to hold oil or gas and can now be used for storing CO2 safely for long periods. And as well as using the CO2 from St Fergus from the SMR, the plan is also to open it up and to bring in the option for CO2 imports from other parts of the UK, which will help other projects to rapidly scale up and become part of the whole transition to net zero. So shipping for the CO2 as being the starting point, so going into Peterhead, but then the pipeline to take it out to the sequestration sites. And the great thing is a lot of the assets already exist. It's a question of, can they be repurposed for the new duties with the pipelines that could be hydrogen, or it could be carbon dioxide. And the big question now is, how do things develop going forward? So I'd just like to leave you with a few thoughts about some of the scale and the potential that we've actually got in Scotland. And a lot of this comes back to the renewables as the source of energy, essentially starting to replace the oil and gas that Scotland has produced a lot of over the past 40 or 50 years. And the opportunity for offshore wind is looking really quite stunning. So the UK is actually, this is one of the areas that the UK is leading, is in the deployment of offshore wind. It's the country with the most offshore wind installed. The plan is that by 2030, I think it's 40 gigawatts of offshore wind in UK waters. And just to put it in perspective, some of the recent estimates on offshore wind potential indicate that Scotland has the potential to have a capacity of something like 735 gigawatts of offshore wind. So an absolutely massive offshore wind potential, more than Scotland needs, a big chunk of what the UK would need. And if this opens up the potential for actually also feeding into European markets, the production and supply of green hydrogen from offshore wind into UK and offshore European markets. And how would you do that? Well, this is where the pipelines become really central to how you develop this. So the pipelines, which might at the moment be used for oil and gas coming onshore at St. Fergus, could either be used for CO2 or could potentially be used for hydrogen. So if you're producing the hydrogen offshore, it can then come in and start to be part of the decarbonisation, not just of the Aberdeen region, but also Scotland and the rest of the UK. So if we're going to do this at scale, if we're going to meet the net zero targets, we'll also need to think about how we tackle heat. And just as a sort of a couple of parting slides, seasonal heat, you could need, for Scotland, you could need an extra 0.2, quarter of a terawatt hour per day for the winter heat demand. If you don't have the flexibility in the renewables generation, how do you meet it? Well, the good news is there are technologies out there for energy storage. And this is just to give you an idea of starting from a small pen battery, going through larger and larger batteries, but then up to what you might call traditional liquid fuel storage in big onshore storage tanks, coal heaps at the back of power stations, but then also the potential for storing in geological structures, such as salt caverns. The bottom right-hand picture is actually of the wellhead at Spindletop in the States. Salt caverns already used in the UK, East Yorkshire and Cheshire are the two main areas. There are other areas that are potential with suitable salt. There's a recent BGS report which indicates could be 1,000 terawatt hours of storage potential within UK salt formations. One large salt cavern can store up to about a quarter of a terawatt hour as hydrogen gas. So if you've got lots of caverns, the potential is for lots of storage. So salt caverns are a proven technology, they exist already. The big question now is, can we use geological storage in old depleted gas wells? So there's work undergoing at the moment with projects like High Store Poor in the University of Edinburgh. There's other work going on overseas to see if these geological assets can actually be repurposed and be used for hydrogen storage. So the jury's still out on that one, but if it's possible, then that brings in multi-terawatt hour, in the same way as the rough storage that could store up to about 30 terawatt hours of natural gas. If we used rough for hydrogen, you'd probably be able to store about 10 terawatt hours of hydrogen in that same field. Again, the infrastructure is the key to making this all work properly. There's a report out in April by Hydrogen Europe, the 2 times 40 gigawatt study, which has got a great schematic, figure 7 if you're looking for it, showing the European hydrogen backbone and how that might join together parts of Europe that can produce the hydrogen and other parts which would have the demand. So early demand is likely to be in places like the Netherlands and Germany for industrial decarbonisation. And within Scotland, the big question now is, if we start to look at this backbone, how do you then connect it into the local supply points? So this could be islands such as the Western Isles, Orkney and Shetland, or indeed some of the port areas. So Aberdeen and Cromarty could also be very interesting for this opportunity. So just to wrap up, this was really just about giving you an overview of the reason things are happening, the projects that are underway in Scotland. What I'd like to really emphasise is the early projects have helped us to learn a lot. So we're now moving from the learning by doing to actually, we want to now lead by example with larger projects such as H100, such as scaling up the offshore wind hydrogen opportunities. But to make this work as an economy, we need hydrogen supply, we need the infrastructure such as pipelines, and we need the demand. And hydrogen pipelines look like they're going to be the most cost-effective approach to energy transmission at this very large scale, and linking it into storage will be critical for making the whole system work. So building the hydrogen economy, next steps, we need to scale up, and we need the green hydrogen from renewables and the blue hydrogen from steam methane reform with carbon capture. And with all of that, we'll actually be in a good place to actually achieve this transformation to the energy system we want to have, which will deliver in turn net zero. Thank you very much for listening. And John, I'll pass this back to you.
Thanks, Nigel. That was excellent. I see there's some questions coming in already. What we'll do is we'll try and answer those questions at the end of the sessions. Now we'll pass on to Ali. So Ali, are you okay to share your screen and kick things off?
Hi everyone. Hold on. Sure. You'll see that?
Yep, all good, Ali.
All good. Okay, so afternoon everyone. I'm Ali Scott. I'm an Energy Futures Project Officer for SGN. So I've been working quite a lot on our high-level strategy for achieving a hydrogen economy, which I'm going to sort of run you through what our plans are at a high level, and then talk more specifically about industrial clusters and how we see sort of why they're so important and how we see them linking with our with the whole supply chain and the decarbonisation of the gas networks. So okay, so we kind of touched on this, but the UK's made reasonable, pretty strong decarbonisation progress overall, but this has been pretty disproportionate across the economy, and it's been more than half of it's because of the decarbonisation of electricity. And another major factor has actually been emissions reduction through in the industry sector, but that isn't due to them cleaning up their energy supply. It's actually a lot of it's to do with offshoring and the decommissioning of much of our industrial sector and manufacturing heavy industry. So overall, like heat and transport progress has been very, very poor, and it hasn't really made progress at all. And it's sort of just been minor efficiency improvements. And I think it's kind of got to ask you why this is. And the only vector we have just now that can deliver net zero energy at scale is electricity. And that's not always practical for every sector of the economy, such as heat, which I'll come on to now. So this is sort of another version of the graph. I think it's the same data set actually, Nigel. So, but this is it sort of shows Scottish energy demand between 2013 and 2019, and you can see that transport and electricity demand is pretty flat, and gas demand is so peaky with ramp ups, and there's quite a significant inter-seasonal mismatch there. So if you were to deliver that with electricity, which is currently the only option available to policymakers, you would have to build out significant storage similar to that of gas storage, which doesn't exist right now in a practical sense. And I think it kind of brings on to a wider point of chemical energy. So the reason, the bottom right graph there, or chart, sort of shows the transport, domestic industry and commercial sectors. And you can see that we're pretty dominated, transport's dominated by petroleum products, and natural gas dominates domestics through heat, and everything orange there is basically for heat. That's our final use energy. And you kind of, the reason that we use natural gas, I mean, most people know this, but it's so energy dense, it's easy to store and transport. And also the technologies which use it, the appliances are so mature, they're reliable, and customers are familiar with them as well. So people, industry are used to using these appliances and these fuels. It's the same thing with transport. Petroleum products are widely produced, and they're utilized in affordable engines, so in internal combustion engines. The point here is that we sort of feel it's easier to enact a change in the system as opposed to the consumer side. So if you were to electrify these sectors of the economy, you'd require quite a lot of, it would be quite a disruptive option. So we feel that the use of a low carbon chemical energy sources such as hydrogen, if you change the system to transport green energy, is more practical, it's lower disruption, and it's actually more deliverable as well, we feel. So that kind of brings on to SGN strategy, which was well publicized in our business plan, was we want to develop a hydrogen economy in our patches, so and across the UK. So by part of our high level targets, we want to sort of prove and evidence the safety and technical aspects of hydrogen distribution, and also outline our sort of detailed strategy as to how we're going to do so. So after 2026, we want to start sort of rolling hydrogen out before 2026, where the end of the price control period. But we kind of want to, we've identified several sort of frontier towns, we've called them, and they're like high potential areas characterized by things like proximity to industrial clusters, they're coastal, so there are links to green hydrogen, links to natural gas infrastructure, and yeah, also how the sort of specific interests are geared up towards transitioning. So areas with lots of industrial presence, as I mentioned. And what our purpose in this, our role in this whole journey is to help stimulate that demand. So if we convert our networks and we enable that change, it does provide that route to market for hydrogen producers, and that's where the difficulty I feel here is in basically coordinating the build out of hydrogen production, and also coordinating the conversion of the networks and the conversion of customers all at once. So everyone has to be kind of on the same pathway here. So I'll run through some, the bottom diagrams are gas quality decarbonisation pathway, which I won't run you through all of it in the interest of time, but it basically is detailed in our business plan, but it breaks down the key technical and safety evidence that we need to achieve and demonstrate to inform heat policy decisions, which are due in 2023, 2024 from UK government. So I've kind of just focused on Scotland here, but we do have similar projects in the southeast. But the diagram there shows some of it's a little bit dated now, but it kind of shows the range of projects we're looking to achieve. And I've kind of highlighted two. So the bottom right diagram is our H100 Fife demonstration. So we're looking to build the world's first 100% hydrogen network from green hydrogen, initially to 300 homes who will have the choice between natural gas and hydrogen. And we're building a demonstration home so they can sort of experience hydrogen appliances before they decide to switch. And ultimately, H100 Fife aims to develop a hydrogen economy in Fife with sort of various expansion opportunities. And our NIC bid for that is just it was submitted about a month ago now, so we're going through the process of answering questions from Ofgem. And then the sort of second project I've highlighted is our LTS Futures project, and that's looking at the repurposing and the revalidation of the transmission pipelines, the LTS pipelines for hydrogen and also for CO2. So we've kind of got these assets in the ground already, so we're kind of looking at how we're going to repurpose them, because if you have to sort of lay a whole new network, the picture kind of changes a bit. So it's important we're able to do that. So where this sort of fits in with the oil and gas industry, and also in sort of industry itself, just the advantage of hydrogen is it almost allows the oil and gas industry to keep doing what it's doing, but do so with net zero energy. So the oil and gas industry brings energy to people from faraway locations because it's so energy dense and it's so easy to transport, as opposed to the electricity generation model where you build, say, a wind farm off the coast of a city and supply it there and then. So it's using sort of local energy supplies as opposed to bringing energy. So hydrogen allows you to reach further out and take that energy and bring it to people, and it's a route to repurpose much of the supply chain, which you'll all know how important the oil and gas sector is to the UK economy. It supports hundreds of thousands of jobs, and a lot of those jobs are concentrated in highly concentrated in certain cities such as Aberdeen. So we're working with those supply chains to ensure that everyone's on the same page and everyone's on the same timeline to develop not only hydrogen production but carbon capture capabilities, and also expanding it to green hydrogen, which I'll come on to soon. Sort of coming on to industrial clusters. So industrial clusters are areas of highly concentrated industrial activity and energy demand. They've got excellent supporting infrastructure, natural gas supply chains, energy supplies, and they're very concentrated areas of emissions as well. So actually, if you target them with CCS, they're very you can get quite a quick result there. And it's quite this decarbonising industrial clusters is quite aligned with government strategy. So as part of the green recovery, the UK government have already indicated the investment of 139 million towards developing hydrogen and CCS at areas of heavy industry and manufacturing. So the 6 largest industrial clusters are sort of 5 of them are in, 4 of them are in England, and there was one in Scotland, one in Wales. So it's, for us, targeting industrial clusters is a good way to sort of stimulate demand, which I'll run through now. Sort of we saw this diagram earlier on, but this is our. I'm just focusing on Scotland here, but we do have in our Southampton water project is targeting the industrial cluster at Southampton, and then Project Cavendish is targeting the sort of southeast, sort of the Kent area, with hydrogen and CCS there. But this is our industrial cluster project, which looks at developing it's sort of a high level concept of how we want to connect the oil and gas supply chain, or the hydrogen supply chain, with industrial clusters and the gas networks. Because as I mentioned before, we need to, the concept is there, the practicality is there, but the actual delivery plan needs to be coordinated between all tenets of the industry. So you can see there that not all these are real. You can see everything on land is basically, with the exception of the blue line, which is our proposed hydrogen pipeline as part of our Aberdeen Vision project. So originally that was going to go from St Fergus to Aberdeen to supply Aberdeen City with 100% hydrogen. But this is still sort of subject to change. But we're looking at running a parallel, or sort of 100% hydrogen pipeline to all the offtakes, or most of the offtakes in Scotland, to stimulate the hydrogen economy, you need to bring 100% hydrogen to as many people as you possibly can, because then that's the only way you're going to get cost competitiveness and actually start to scale it through the economy of scale. So with regards to the NTS, we kind of feel that there's a lot of uncertainty around the repurposing of the NTS, and we feel that new pipelines are going to be needed. So our plan here is basically we want to have a 100% pipeline and inject a 20% blend to major offtakes, because 20% is the point where appliances don't need to be changed. You can, in theory, it needs to be approved through legislation. But if you can in theory use a boiler with 20% hydrogen blend, which is, in reality, that's only 7% of energy. But the point of it is it stimulates that demand. It stimulates the upstream supply chain, and that's where the big investment is. The Gasco's Green analysis indicated that the cost of the whole of the UK to develop a hydrogen economy is of the order of £1.3 trillion. About I think it was 1.1 trillion of that was in the supply chain, in the upstream supply chain, with the networks sort of requiring about a £90 billion investment to sort of transition. So this pipeline is also, we've got a concept of a hydrogen supergrid, which is an offshore transmission line, which is a way to connect to hydrogen storage, to connect to CCS, and just provide that. Because I think it's important to sort of keep in mind just the quantity of energy that's needed here. You have to basically make all the natural gas that we're using and more to supply, and then that provides your market access into heat and to industry, and also to transport as well. And sort of we touched on sort of green hydrogen, but this green hydrogen is obviously from offshore wind. It allows you to build more, because as that model of bringing energy to people, you can build a wind farm further out and transport it through hydrogen. And that's sort of seen in the Dolphin project. And you can see that the sort of orange shaded areas, the areas of the sort of high potential for offshore wind in Scotland. So we feel like the ultimate, like, is my view that the ultimate sort of scenario you have for the gas industry and the sort of energy industry is 100% secure supply from green hydrogen, because then you're not relying on CCS infrastructure, you're not relying on natural gas supplies, and it's fully net zero energy as well. And it provides that route to market and for tremendous growth in the UK. So I'll end there, and just happy to take any questions. But hopefully that sort of gives you a quick tour of what we've got planned for industrial clusters, and also sort of more over our strategy in GD2 and beyond. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Ali, for that. So I'm mindful of the time, so I think we did suggest that we may wrap it up around about 1:45. But we're quite happy to stay on for an extra 5 minutes, hopefully push it out a wee bit more. And what I'll do is see some questions coming in on the chat. So if we go to the Phil question, and I guess a bit of an opportunity here to thank as well one of the active committee members with the Scottish branch trying to get things up and going again. So Phil's actually got a question, Joe. So acknowledge really interesting presentation pipelines for carrying CO2 and hydrogen. Is this likely to result in the need to line the pipelines, or can additives be used?
Sorry, John, you're breaking up a bit there. Could you repeat that?
Oh, sorry, Nigel. Did you get that? To the first question for Phil, repurposing of pipelines, Nigel.
So yes, so Phil, thanks for the question about repurposing pipelines. So there is actually work that's been carried out in the UK 15 years ago by EGA for the DTI on the repurposing of the pipelines off the coast of east of England. So that's something that's worth going back to as a legacy report. More recently, there's been a lot of work going on in Germany. So the repurposing of existing pipelines, onshore pipelines, transmission pipelines by Open Grid Europe. They've done a lot of detailed work on that. And I think there's a number of the other gas transmission utilities have likewise done quite a bit of work on the repurposing of their assets. I think a lot of the devil's in the detail in terms of the materials of construction, and then the way the pipelines are being used in terms of the pressure and the number of pressure cycles. So, Phil, I'm happy to share any information I've got, and if there's anything else that you need, just let me know.
Okay, thanks, Nigel. And again, there's a note there from Kate as well. So any questions that are not answered today, we will respond, and we'll take a transcript to the comments, and we'll make sure that every question is answered. So there's a question for Ali as well, and it's from Neil Glover. And Ali, what are the opportunities for the SMR offshore oil and gas installations with re-injection back into the reservoir and export of hydrogen to shore, thus avoiding an extra pipeline? And that was from Neil.
It's an interesting concept that I think it's an example of how so if you stimulate the market, you can stimulate any form of production as long as the final product's there and it's net zero. So the reason we're kind of looking at repurposing pipelines because they're already connected to those wells. But if you do have, you could see there's no reason you couldn't sort of repurpose existing infrastructure to inject back in. It would just be a sort of a sense of scale of it. I'm not too clued up on it, but I can look into that further and actually come back in as to what that would practically look like. But theoretically, there's no reason that wouldn't work. It's just the whole point of we want to use basically all the pipelines that we can, or I think that we should strive to do so. They're already there, so it's in the interest of sort of keeping of asset retention is something that we do. But there's definitely, as I said, we need to build new pipelines, and there's going to be need for the new build out of CCS infrastructure as well. So it is a good concept. happy to talk about that further as well.
Oh, that would be good. So there's a comment from Greg. The Oil and Gas Technology Centre has been looking at a methodology for assessing pipeline suitability for repurposing, and a draft is available. So what I would suggest, Greg, if you could maybe share that via Kate or myself, and we'd be happy to pick up a conversation and a discussion with you and the team at OGTC in the future. I noticed as well, Nigel, there's a couple of questions in here. So there was one earlier, I can't remember who it was from, but one from Roberto, and it's about compression. So I don't know if, Roberto, do you want to ask a bit more around that subject, or?
Well, can I just say a couple of words about compression? So, you know, the hydrogen industry has been around for, you know, the best part of a century. Some of the compression requirements are very specific. So if you're running an ammonia plant, you need a lot of hydrogen compressed up to a reasonably high pressure. So that there are, you know, there is equipment that is well established for that duty. There is also, when we use the hydrogen for transport, so some of the examples I showed you of, you know, trucks and buses, the hydrogen is typically taken up to a pressure of either 350 or 700 atmospheres and stored in tanks. So there's absolutely, you know, the experience with handling the hydrogen at high pressure, but we aren't talking about the kind of volumes you would push down a pipeline. What I'm not sure is how the existing, you know, compressors in the pipelines would work with hydrogen, but I'm sure somebody has started to do that work. You know, in terms of how you might use those same types of turbines for hydrogen duty.
Okay, thanks, Nigel. And I'd say we maybe get time for one more for Ali. And it was a question I was going to ask, and I see there's one here from Chris. Is there going to be a solution for fuel poor customers to change from natural gas to hydrogen in Scotland? And I know it's something Ali had touched on earlier about electrification not being practical, efficient, or cost effective, but how do we ensure that hydrogen is cost competitive, Ali? And also, you know, with a view on our consumer.
So,
did you get that, Ali?
Yeah, most of it. I'll touch on the cost competitive aspect first. But, so right now, hydrogen won't be cost competitive with natural gas, but you know, no one expects it to be so. What will make it cost competitive though is that economy of scale. So, for example, a hydrogen boiler will not cost the same to manufacture as a natural gas boiler, but when you start to scale up production of that, and when you have investor confidence in that hydrogen economy, that's when you see the price come down to a cost competitive level. I saw a recent projection saw that the cost of a hydrogen boiler itself will come down by about 45% between 2020 and 2030 upon stimulation of a large-scale hydrogen production and demand. And then, so I think in terms of the capital expenditure to use a hydrogen boiler, it is comparative to natural gas, and natural gas is the cheapest form of heating. A natural gas boiler, if you start to electrify heat, you need to start looking at every individual property. You need to increase your thermal efficiencies quite significantly. You need to install heat pumps, and also the price of electricity is higher. It can be offset by the efficiency gains of a heat pump, but in terms of our sort of fuel poor aspect of it, I mean, SGN's always has high level targets in GD2 to invest in fuel poor customers to ensure that they have affordable heating. It's not really my area, so I can come back on this, but upon scaled development, it will be the cheapest way to heat home. So it's kind of we want to make sure everyone in society has access to this. We don't want to just limit it to industry. We want to, as I said, we want to roll it out to all our networks. And I know H100 Fife is in Leavenmouth, so that's is a prime example of that, of quite a fuel poor area as well. So we're kind of engaging with society and customers to ensure that they're on board with it. So hopefully that answers your question. I can sort of come back with a more detailed answer on the fuel poor aspect, but we do see hydrogen being cost competitive certainly by 2040 in terms of the price per kilowatt hour.
Yeah, and I think just to add to Ali's point, if you look at the draft determination recently from Ofgem, the focus for our innovation and R&D is energy system transition. But there's also a big expectation from Ofgem that consumer vulnerability will be considered at each and every stage. Okay, so I guess we're running out of time. So what we'll do is we'll take a copy of the transcript of the questions, and through the Guild will send a response to all of those questions and maybe some contact details for further discussions. We'll do that pretty much in the next couple of days. What we'll also do is the recording will be available on the Guild website, and we'll also make the presentation material available. We'll also be following up with this first webinar with some in-depth technical discussions with some project examples. And again, if you take a look at the Guild's website, there's a lot going on with these webinars over the next month in September. So please go to the Guild website and see if there's anything else that is of interest, and you can register online. And again, Nigel, thanks a lot for your support today. Really appreciated. Ali as well, thanks for a great presentation. And thanks for everyone for attending. So it's been our first webinar, hopefully the first of many. So thanks everyone, and hopefully catch up with you soon.